Over the last decade, Arc System Works has been dominating the fighting game scene. With Guilty Gear Xrd, they shattered the standards of what an anime fighter could look like. Then, with Dragon Ball FighterZ, they briefly united top players from across the FGC under one game based on an iconic IP. After this, they would make one of the wildest crossover fighters with BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle, and finally, they redefined the online experience with Guilty Gear Strive. But in the midst of all their success, one game got the short end of the stick. 2 years after BlazBlue, and just a few months after Strive's announcement, ArcSys released a fighter that, despite receiving a ton of hype, seemingly vanished before it even had a chance to be seen. Today, we're going to be talking about what happened to Granblue Fantasy Versus. Granblue Fantasy is a browser and mobile role-playing game developed by Chay Games, which was released in Japan in 2014. It features music and art from Nobuo Uematsu and Hideo Minaba, who had worked together on Final Fantasy V, 6, and 9, as well as Lost Odyssey, and the game quickly developed a massive following, surpassing 25 million downloads by the end of 2019. And so, creative director Tetsuya Fukuhara and Chay Games commissioned Arc System Works to produce a fighting game with the hopes of bringing more awareness to their franchise overseas. And awareness they got.
Dude, for in-game graphics, damn! Holy shit, man. These 3D models are ridiculous.
And it's easy to see why the game garnered so much early excitement. A popular IP brought to life with stunning visuals by the same studio that created DBFZ? It seemed like success was all but guaranteed, and with a spot locked for the main stage at EVO 2020, it looked like Granblue was going to be a major FGC title for years to come. And Granblue had one more thing pushing it forward: accessibility.
The conversation of accessibility in fighting games is going to come up very frequently. It's definitely a pretty big talking point, if not a point of controversy in the fighting game community. However, I would definitely say that Granblue executed it really well.
The game itself is very promoting of patient play and rewards people for putting a lot of work. I think a lot of people gave it flack for being maybe a little bit too simple on release, but I think that as the metagame's been developed and as people have gotten better at it, it's definitely shown a lot of nuance.
One of the most intimidating parts of learning a fighting game is the execution of moves. Traditionally, fighting game inputs are complex, precise, and have a very short timing window if you want to do something properly.
Woo! Oh, I did it! 10-hit combo, 83 damage. That's hard to do, but it works.
Dragon Ball FighterZ attempted to lower this barrier for entry with its auto combo system, but Granblue pushed this further with a unique spin.
People like to bring up all the time that there's no resource management in Granblue Fantasy Versus, but when you consider the fact that we have the cooldown system, which not only helps to bridge that issue by adding in cooldown management, it's a really interesting take for sure, and giving new players the option in not just, general gameplay, but in specific situations to opt for easy input, basically single directional input plus a button. It's clearly had an effect already with other games like Multiple Type Lumina.
Rather than rely exclusively on command inputs, Granblue used a cooldown system similar to what you might see in an action RPG. With simple button presses, players could fire off their special abilities, and although these moves could also be activated with advanced inputs to lower the cooldown, this system significantly lowered the barrier for entry for new players. Granblue Fantasy Versus released in February of 2020 in Japan and made its way to North America by March. The game received largely positive reviews from both fighting game fans and critics, and just like DBFZ, it had everyone from Sonicfox to Leffen streaming something new.
This game, kind of like Dragon Ball, it had a lot of cross-game rivalries where there's people from this guy's like a KOF player up against this guy who's known for playing Melty Blood, and this guy's known for playing Dragon Ball, and this guy's known for playing Dengeki Bunko Fighting Climate, everybody from all over the place, right? That was something that's really interesting about Granblue.
There were some critiques, but the game was quickly developing a community of competitors and fans eagerly awaiting the start of the tournament season. As we already mentioned, Granblue was selected as a main game for EVO and also had a slot in Arc System Works' international circuit, the Arc World Tour. The stage was set for Granblue to become a mainstay series in the FGC, but there was one thing no one had accounted for.
There was a lot of eyes on the game initially as an EVO title, and lots of other major tournaments as well having a pretty keen focus on it. There was a lot of promise for the game, and whilst I don't think that promise has necessarily been wasted as a result of the online era, there's obviously been all sorts of adversity in the FGC in general, and a lot of the major tournaments and a lot of the major infrastructure having to be changed pretty dramatically over the past couple of years as a result of the shift more towards, the forcible shift towards online.
Well before Granblue actually launched, some players were already raising concerns about the lack of rollback netcode. We've spoken a lot on this channel about the impact rollback netcode can have on a fighting game scene, but many Japanese developers have largely ignored this concern for years, continuing to push out games that play great at an in-person tournament but are nearly unplayable online. While this issue is not limited to Granblue's devs, there were plenty of examples out in the world of games of smaller teams with lower budgets creating fantastic online experiences for their players. Fighting game developers seem to be the exception. And sadly, we all know what comes next. The fighting game community was hit harder than any other esports scene by the COVID-19 pandemic. The loss of in-person events meant that every fighting game scene suddenly had to face the reality of their weak online infrastructure, and Granblue was no different. The game's other issues became more glaring. First was Granblue's poor launch strategy. The month-long wait between the Japanese and international releases, coupled with an even longer delay for the PC version, created significant confusion even among popular streamers.
Wow, how was I supposed to know that? That was the least clear of, well, to be fair, these are supposed to be played in the language you understand.
Then, the game's 12-fighter roster felt far too small to justify it being a $60 title. Now, if COVID hadn't hit and Granblue had had the time to develop a proper offline scene, these early stumbles might have been less glaring. By all accounts, the gameplay was and is sick.
I'm gonna spot dodge. Oh, it fucking works!
And high-level play is satisfying for players and entertaining for viewers. But unfortunate timing robbed Granblue of any chance to build that offline momentum, so the only experience anyone ever had with the game was online on delay-based netcode.
A large portion of what makes fighting games special to me, especially compared to other esports, is just how social they are and how sort of, down to earth the events are. If you're a huge Dota fanatic, you can't show up to TI and play, but for a fighting game, you can show up to Evo and play, and that's just the norm. Losing that is definitely not a good look for any fighting game, much less one that has delay-based netcode.
Let's take a moment to compare Granblue to a game like Street Fighter V. Both games have notoriously bad netcode and are routinely criticized by popular influencers.
Street Fighter V on release was one of the worst games I've ever played. You could rage quit with no problems. It didn't have any features. It was extremely bad.
However, Street Fighter has a massive community and decades of legacy behind it. So poor netcode isn't a make or break for Street Fighter's brand. Granblue, on the other hand, was just getting started in the FGC and needed a strong start to have any hope of surviving. Today, according to Steam charts, the PC version of Street Fighter V averages nearly 2,000 active players, while Granblue sits at just over 50. With the FGC fed up with the poor netcode and the online era beginning, ArcSys would put a lot of care into making sure Guilty Gear Strive had a great online experience. Now, Strive has one of the healthiest online ecosystems in the scene, complete with its own developer-supported circuit. And while it's tragic that Granblue just barely had to pay for the pre-existing problems of fighting game releases, it will hopefully be the last major release to suffer such a blow.
I made a tweet yesterday. A lot of people seem to agree with it, I guess, and then there was a few people who didn't. And I said, if not for COVID, I think GBVS would have some of the most interesting international competition and incredible top 8s of 2020 IMO. To be honest with you, as usual, probably not a very hot take, right? I think most of us agree that Granblue was in a great spot to just have a slam dunk this year.
Despite all its setbacks, there's still hope for Granblue yet. It's not like the rock-solid gameplay that the game was praised for just went away. COVID might have disrupted the game's launch, but its solid foundation still remains. At its core, Granblue is still an incredible offline fighting game with loads of potential.
What surprises me maybe most about the Granblue community, having been a part of many fighting games communities, is the number of people who are still in the community and this was their first fighting game. It's kind of astounding. I think that's a really cool aspect of how the games community has developed.
It's unclear what the future holds for Granblue. The last confirmed DLC will release in December 2021, and there have been no announcements regarding future support or a sequel. There's also no evidence that Granblue will be added to Arc System Works Pro Circuit in the future. Still, Granblue will get its chance offline. The game has spots at CEO in December and Frosty Faustings in January. Organizers like Team Spooky's and LBC have kept the game going online despite all the challenges that presents. In Japan, Granblue is still alive and kicking, where events like Rage have been able to continue unabated for the last 2 years.
But opportunities for online fighting games to coexist with offline fighting games is something that is really important. Having the potential that Granblue and its community, not just that the potential that exists in the game, but that the community members deserve the recognition, the opportunity that the community and its players, its tournament organizers, its commentators, everyone involved in the community work so far that has kept this game not just alive but thriving through the online era. They really do deserve a huge amount of recognition and a huge amount of support.
It's a tough place to be. There's passion in this community, a desire to compete, but also a feeling like they might have missed their one and only chance to enter the spotlight. Although the train may have passed by, Granblue is still a really good fighting game. Its mechanics and aesthetic are wonderfully polished, and if there's one thing we've learned on this channel, it's that a small group of dedicated players can sometimes be enough to keep a game alive. This video is made possible thanks to our wonderful patrons. Massive thank you to everyone on this list, and shout out to Jason, B, Brendan, QB, Foxy, Mauve, Sierra, Shampoo, Weeaboo, and Spartacus for being platinum supporters. And an extra special shout out to Steven, Noodles, and Marco for being diamond supporters. Thank you all, and happy holidays. Be sure to check us out on Instagram, link in the description. If you want to support our channel and get info on unreleased videos, check out our Patreon. If you want to help us out in a different way, leaving a like, subscribing, and hitting the bell to stay up to date is also appreciated. My name is Jonah, thanks for watching.